I wanted this building to be one of its kind, because this is the first building which is on this road of 17.5 meters, and I wanted it to look totally different. Apart from the utility, the beauty, the idea was to cordon off the sun rays so that I can make it a green effect building to get the best of environment and design. That was the concept.
When I saw the drawings and the 3D and renders of this project, so I feel कि बहुत मज़ा आने वाला है. This is actually something different in the conventional market. But when we go to the execution, start the detailing drawing, तो we found नहीं, ये इतना easy नहीं है. हमें कुछ अलग सोचना पड़ेगा, अलग तरीके से करना पड़ेगा. Then हमने प्रोटोज शुरू करे. उसके बाद बहुत सारे फिक्सेशन चैलेंजेस थे जिसको हमने टीम के साथ डिस्कशन किया, उनको अलग मशीनरी तरीके से उनको डेवलप किया, तब जाके हमने उनकी शॉप ड्राइंग्स डेवलप की. बट हाँ, व्हेन वी स्टार्ट वंस तो वी अंडरस्टैंड द थिंग्स, और वो जो पैशन था कि जो है उसको ही डिलीवर करना है, तो दैट मेक्स वर्क्स. उसने बताया कि हाँ कैसे हमें उस चीज़ को लेके जाना है, उसके पास लेके जाना है, जो हमें मिला है एग्जैक्टली हमें वही बनाना है. तो एक बार हम शुरू हुए तो इट वर्क्स, और हम धीरे धीरे करते चले जाए. डिज़ाइनिंग टीम के साथ, आपकी डिज़ाइनिंग टीम के साथ डिस्कशंस हुआ, हमारी एग्जीक्यूशन टीम के साथ डिस्कशन हुआ, जो हमारे लेबर थी या जो हमारे स्किल्स पर्सनस थे, हमने उनके साथ डिस्कशन करके उनके चैलेंजेस समझे और फिर उसको शॉर्ट आउट किया मिलके. तो मेन जो मोटिव था वो ये था कि जो डिज़ाइन हुआ है 100% तो नहीं, पर 99% हमें उसके पास जाना ही जाना है. 100% ये हमारा बेस्ट मोटिवेशन था और यही हमारा मोटिव था.
एज जो इसका डिज़ाइन है बहुत इरेगुलर है. एज इसमें फिन्स जो हमारे वर्टिकल है वो सन को कट करते हैं, तो उसकी जो हमको एज हमने फिन्स लगाए हैं, तो उसको जब हमने एग्जीक्यूट किया, हमको मेन चैलेंज उसमें था कि इसको हमको सन की डायरेक्शन में लगाना कि सन कट करे. उसका मेन क्या था, क्वालिटी कंट्रोल, फसाड की हाइट बहुत ज़्यादा है, तो सेफ्टी मैनेज करना, वो सब चीज़ें मैनेज करने में हमको इसमें चैलेंज चाहिए. तो और उसके बाद इसका जो अब मॉनिटरिंग में क्या था, हमारी जो फसाड है, जो बिल्डिंग है पूरी एज टू एज है. तो एज टू एज है, उसमें क्या था कि अपना जो नेबर्स है, नेबर्स को एंट्रेंस ना हो, वो सब मैनेज करने में प्रॉब्लम हुई है. तो एज ए पीएमसी हमको ये सब चीज़ें इसमें मैनेज करनी पड़ी है.
Yes, I met RATLab people and we shared our thoughts, and I think they were very effectively, they were able to convert my thoughts into the concepts which they shared and we liked. They gave us a couple of options, and in fact we liked all the options, and we shortlisted on the one which we have adopted now.
So the site context that we received, basically this is a commercial building which was in the process of construction at the time when we were onboarded for the project, and it is a south facing building. There's a metro line that goes right in front of it, and you have this entire thing as a south facing facade, which means a lot of heat gains that were going to be expected out of the sun that is going in front. And there's a huge tree as well in front which sort of blocks the view. So the whole part of the brief was that how can we cut off the direct sunlight and yet make sure that there is some diffuse light that is entering the building. Now there are many ways of making a light diffused. Either you put like a translucent screen, or you cut off the glass, put the glass at an angle, or put some obstruction. But the moment you put a translucent film or something, it makes it into a diffuse light, but the heat is not controlled completely. Secondly, you do not get the views, so you don't want to cut the views. So it's a very, very challenging balance that we had to make sure that we maximize the views, we reduce the heat, and we convert the light into diffuse light. So how we started was, we wanted to create sort of a modular system which can create an easy to execute system. However, we ended up with a differentiated effect, and what we worked was, we did these number of fins. So there were about 19 fins across the entire breadth of the building, and a central space had to be given for the signages. This building's function was to be leased out with these 4 floors of about 4,000 square feet each, to be leased out, and we had a stilt and we had this main entrance over here. So architecturally, the main lobby and the entrance were sort of locked. The stilts was sort of locked. Signage had to be given. Views had to be maximized. Heat had to be reduced. Light had to be converted into diffused light. So when we started to create a singular module which sort of takes care of everything. And we designed a module in a manner where we had this simple rectangular element, and we thought, okay, we need to make a part of it, a percentage of it as open, a percentage of it as closed, and a percentage of it as sort of, let's say, an aesthetic element. So we provided this slit on top of this fin. We made this as an angle over here within the rectangle, and this sort of became the solid part. And this open part that you had, we introduced a mesh. So this was a metal mesh which could change your light coming into the building into diffused light. So we explored a lot of materials. At the same time, of course, cost had to be brought down as well. Of course, that is always a challenge. How do we reduce down the cost of creating something like this? So we worked with a modular system that will create a fin which can be sort of repeated, but the repetition needs to have some sort of a differentiation. Now when I say differentiation, I mean some sort of a geometric differentiation needs to be made to create a high value aesthetics, because this had to be sort of the iconic building at the main road over here. So yes, this is a 2-dimensional diagram that I'm drawing right now. The same thing, this angle sort of comes in the z-axis and sort of slides in to make this as a flat geometry over here, eventually ending up with something like this, which is a 3-dimensional geometry where you have this angle coming in out, then this face sort of goes in and merging with this face, and this face sort of goes up, and the entire face is put at an angle. So if you look at this entire building in the plan view, if you've got a section over here, so this will be at an angle, this will be at an angle, and these angles were sort of changing. This is sort of the diagrammatic representation of the angles. Now what we did was we started with a basic solar radiation study of the building and the light quality on the floor plates of the building. Once we did that, we realized, okay, how much of direct heat we need to cut off. There was definitely a harsh amount of heat that was being gained by the building with the radiation that is coming in. So these angles or angular fins allowed us to sort of cut off the direct radiation from the sun and sort of reflect that back in a manner where it sort of optimizes the amount of heat gain overall on the building. It also allowed us to play with the differentiation to have an interesting aesthetics of the building, where we added these golden plates, metallic plates right in front to sort of actuate this entire aesthetics of the facade basically. So what you see over here, the diffuse material that I was talking about, the kind of diffuse material, there we used something called an expanded mesh, which is a very lightweight and also a cost-effective material, which is an industrial material, which is just like a stretched fabric of metal, and it has this kind of a geometry crisscross pattern, rather a more digrid kind of a pattern. So allowing this kind of a perforation cut off the direct light that is entering the building, And another thing that we had to factor in, that as the building sort of goes up, I mean this part we have a tree over here, so the bottom part we allowed a maximum transparency or a visibility. As we go up, the visibility becomes slightly lesser. As we go up on the next level, it becomes a little more lesser. As we go on the top floor, it becomes absolutely less, and with these slits we get the diffuse light. So these thin slits that we have over here allowed light to sort of come inside the floor plate in a very even manner. So this entire floor on the top receives the light completely diffused. Yet it also has certain punctures which allows you to have certain views as well. So as per the functionality required on each of the levels, we did manage to create this differentiation effect, where as you move vertically up, you have less amount of direct light because you will be receiving the maximum amount of sun over here. It had to be cut off, and at the bottom it was anyway shaded a bit with the trees in the front, so we could really open up the facade in this manner and have a diffused sort of a mesh which creates a diffused light. So I think that really became the key to the entire project, and yeah, it ended up with, I would say, somewhat like this. So these are the fins, that's the triangulation effect that you get. You have this entrance over here, and this entire section in the middle is for the signages. So being a commercial building, you needed to define some space for signages. We didn't want anyone to cover the entire facade with a signage or a branding, so we wanted to control that. So when the building floors are given for leasing purpose, we can sort of control that through the design of the facade. So that really became an effective idea, where we could take this kind of a space for branding, so everything is defined, and this entire thing becomes the iconic facade of this project.
Facade has been designed not only to add the beauty, but also to fulfill all our objectives which we had in mind, as far as to have a greenhouse effect into the building regarding noise, sound, sunlight and exposure. It was all covered and well, beautifully done.
25 मीटर हाइट ऑफ द मैक्सिमम फिन हाइट। तो जो हमने 8-8 फीट के फिन्स बनाए वो हमने सब फैक्ट्री में गए, पाउडर कोटिंग करके उसको बाद में हमने साइट पे आके जॉइंट किया। तो वी कैन से कि 50% फैक्ट्री 50% साइट। उसके पीछे की जो फ्रेमिंग थी वो बड़ी चैलेंजिंग थी, तो हमने उसके पीछे MS की फ्रेमिंग की, उसको ऊपर पेंट किया, वाटरप्रूफ बनाया, उसे वेदर रेजिस्ट बनाया और मैकेनिकली सारे सिस्टम को हमने वहाँ पे फिक्स किया। और इसके लिए बहुत ज़रूरी हो जाता है कि हम अपने मटेरियल्स को बड़े ही तरीके से उनकी नेचर समझते हुए सेलेक्ट करें, क्योंकि अगर हम यहाँ पे किसी और मटेरियल्स पे जाते, अभी हमने ये MS में किया है, अगर हम ये किसी और मटेरियल्स पे जाते तो शायद वो उतने अच्छे से इंस्टॉल नहीं हो पाता या एग्जीक्यूट नहीं हो पाता। तो आई मस्ट से कि सिलेक्शन ऑफ मटेरियल इज वेरी 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 वाइटल रोल प्ले इन द प्रोजेक्ट।
Basically, what RATLAB has done is, we saw their presentations. They're very scientifically cordoned off the sun rays, and they have been able to manage the design angles and other aspects to give us sufficient light and yet control the heat, making the building quite effective. And probably we'll have less of heat load and air conditioning load because of this.
Another challenge that we had during the design of the project was that the project came with a sort of an iconic aspiration, yet it could not be symmetrical. So because of the way the architectural layout was sort of devised by the architects, we had one part of the building which had the entrance and the lobby area, and we had to put signages at the center, almost the central part of the building, which made the entire facade as sort of asymmetrical as a canvas for us. So we had to make sure that although we wanted to create a differentiation of variation that we want to introduce in the geometries as components that go from left to right, there were about 19 fins that we had to devise with the signage element in the center. but at the same time it came with a sort of an asymmetry. So we really had to think in a manner where, okay, this is sort of our attractor curve over here, this is sort of an attractor curve over here. So any sort of a variation in the design of the fin that we had, that where does it move into a sharp edge, where does it go inside into the -z axis, that particular point was chosen based on this attraction curve basically. And you have this attractor curve over here, which ended up making sure that the split between the solid and the transparent or the translucent element came at this intersection of this fin and this curve. And that is exactly how this was sort of scaled up and down to create a symmetrical area in this one, then the space for signage, and then another asymmetric area over here. So basically the entire facade sort of got divided into 1, 2 and 3 parts, where part 1 is symmetrical in itself, part 2 is for the signages, part 3 is an asymmetric part, yet it had to create a cohesive balance overall. So that particular balance we had to sort of achieve on the facade, and it ends up being something like this, as you see. So this is a symmetrical part, central part, and the asymmetric part with the entrance door over here.
You see, the best part was the diffused lighting which they gave, and in the evenings when we switch it on, it looks a beautiful building. We have received a lot of compliments because every night we switch it on, and we have got very good response from people around and who pass by and the people I know, because it gives a beautiful effect. And let's hope that everything matches and complements each other, and it stays one of the best buildings for times to come.
So another part of the project was to create sort of a landscape, which is sort of the frontage area of the facade of the building. And typically whenever we design a facade, it sort of becomes sort of the identity of the building, creating an icon. And we want to sort of incorporate that design language as a design accent in the landscape area, which sort of was the front part of the facade and the plaza where your car parking and your driveway is. And what we did was, so this is the sharp edged facade that we have, which had its own identity and language. We didn't want to replicate this entire pattern onto the flooring pattern over here, but we wanted some sort of a correlation. So what we did was we sort of took these down into sort of linear elements on both the sides, keeping the central one as a plane, and we played with a combination of 2 stones in 2 shades of grays basically. So very light and a dark gray, basically creating this kind of a language, something which could be easily done in stone basically. So the whole idea was that to create these planters at the edge, we have this space for these planters over here, which were also sort of edgy in the sense that the shape of the planter is sort of derived from this elevation, this facade. So imagine this to be like the elevation as a planter, and that sort of a edgy language, which sort of becomes the futuristic iconic language of the facade, becomes the planters in the landscape. And in the flooring, these vertical strips sort of come down and create this kind of a pattern, which again becomes the identity, because now when you enter the plaza or the building, you see this landscape in perspective and you see the facade standing tall in front of that. So I think that became an interesting element, because the whole language that the building is showing is sort of translated and articulated in a different manner into the landscape, which is something which could be easily executed in stone itself, and these planters that we are bringing in. The lighting design of this whole landscape and the facade was also sort of integrated. So the lighting was done also in a manner which allows you to accentuate the geometry of the facade and the landscape. So landscape had these typical planter lights over here and these edgy lights of linear strips, and the facade, you will see that the entire golden strips that are there to accentuate the geometry have this detail of, you have this facade, you have this golden strip coming in front with the light behind it. So you don't see the light directly, but you see the glow of that light illuminating in this particular shape. So that becomes the interesting element. So at night, when you see two kinds of light, one is the light that you see diffusing from inside, from the translucent expanded mesh that we have, and the lights which is sort of the cove lights which are being created as per the strips of the facade. So I think that became a very, very interesting language, because in the evening it sort of glows in this differentiated manner, and lighting is also playing a very crucial role in making this project iconic.
You see, before we decided on RATLab, we had visited many other vendors, and they were all offering beautiful designs but very conventional ones. We found RATLab to be very different and very scientific. I myself, being an engineer, was able to appreciate. We are quite impressed by RATLab. We have been working closely with Sushant, and I think his team has been working very, very effectively. They were able to give those concepts, 3D drawings, 2D drawings, which were well understood by our vendors, and they were able to do exactly replicate what Sushant had in his mind. And we are very satisfied with the overall, and I wish him great success for his all new coming